Hello everyone, welcome to my latest edition of What Went Wrong, where I take a look back at professional wrestling history and look at the things that should have been good, should have worked out great, but ultimately did not. Something had to gum up the works and just kill everybody's good time. So for today's episode, we will be going all the way back to the days of yore, the early days of TNA wrestling, 2004 and 2005, that early growth period for TNA where things really started to click for them at around this time. The early years with the weekly pay-per-view format was a hard sell to a lot of wrestling fans, and there were some growing pains there, but by 04 and 05, it looked like things were finally starting to click. They had gotten a TV deal with FSN, Fox Sports Net, and had a weekly show. That was where Impact debuted, and I honestly enjoyed that show, and that early incarnation with the Fox box, and they actually had the time limits for the matches at the top of the screen, which I loved. I was like, oh my god, like aesthetically, just the way it looks, it immediately looks different from WWE. They debuted the six-sided ring, and they were transitioning into doing 3-hour pay-per-views instead of strictly a weekly pay-per-view format, and just moving past that early stage of their run. So it looked like the sky was the limit, and they were just moving up and up and up. My, how times have changed for TNA Impact. But back then, it was actually an exciting time to be a fan because at that point, and 2004 was when I started watching TNA wrestling, mainly because I was just starved for more wrestling because, and I've said it before, but losing WCW and losing ECW was the worst thing that ever happened to pro wrestling because WWE took over the world and it was just that, and that's really all you had at a mainstream level. So I was just hoping and praying that we could get something else. And it wasn't even that WWE was that bad at this point. Raw was doing some really good things, actually, with the Orton-Foley feud and Chris Benoit's World Heavyweight Champion, even though we're not supposed to remember that. Various other things. The Shawn Michaels Triple H feud was going well. So there was a lot of really good stuff going on in WWE at the time. And on SmackDown, okay, SmackDown itself was terrible, but I liked the JBL title reign. Maybe that'll be part of a series I do, What Went Right, JBL as WWE Champion. I enjoyed him as champion. I just thought he was a great old school heel, and I found him to be quite enjoyable in that spot. So come at me, bro. Come hate me. I like JBL as WWE Champion. So me wanting to watch TNA wasn't so much motivated by hatred towards the WWE because I actually liked a lot of what they were doing. It was just like, I need something else, man. I need more flavors. I don't want to just eat chocolate ice cream. I want strawberry. I want orange sherbet. I want, cheesecake flavored. I want coffee flavored. I want everything. Sometimes I just want straight vanilla. It's, I like having options, and TNA gave me an option for something different. And there were a handful of guys that I really latched onto in those early days. One of them obviously was AJ Styles. I took one look at the X Division, and I remember that main event to the first Impact. It was a 4-way match. It was Sabin, Kazarian, Elix Skipper, and I'm sorry, not Kazarian. It was Michael Shane. It was Sabin, Michael Shane, and Elix Skipper. I hope I've got that right. But it doesn't matter because the fourth man was AJ Styles. And I knew even in that match, I'm like, something about AJ. I don't know what it is. Like, AJ stands out among the rest. And here we are today. AJ's considered to be one of the best in the world. So obviously, I'm not always right, but that was one I picked, and I'm happy to say that. But with all the hype the X Division was getting, I gotta be honest, the thing that I really latched onto was the tag division, because they had Team Canada, they had Triple X, they had America's Most Wanted, Harrison Storm. I think arguably the greatest tag team in TNA history. The only other one that comes close to it, in my opinion, is Beer Money, which also has James Storm in it. Tells you how good he is at tag team wrestling. But yeah, so I was really digging their tag division in those early days. In the heavyweight ranks, Abyss caught my eye really quickly. Jeff Jarrett was world champion, who I thought was a reliable pick. Jeff Hardy came on board at one point to help bolster that. But there was one guy that really stood out to me in the heavyweight ranks. The Alphamale Monty Brown, and he is going to be the subject of this video. The Alphamale Monty Brown, former football player, played in 2 Super Bowls, made the transition to professional wrestling, and You know, I've often said with pro wrestling, you don't necessarily have to be the greatest in-ring worker to get over and be a huge star. It's not always about that, and it's not even always about, there's no like one size fits all answer for everybody. It's just something that you just get a sense of it. Like, you know they're a star just by looking at them, or something they do that gets over. And it's sometimes it's just Goldberg murdering people. Sometimes it's Warrior cutting these crazy ass promos that don't make any sense, but they sound cool. Sometimes it's The Rock just going on his little sing-along routines and that whole personality that went along with the heel turn. You know, great worker or not, all you have to do is connect with the audience. Once you've done that, you're done. You can just you can ride that and have great stories, great matches, great feuds based off of that. There are ways, and if you're limited in the ring, there are ways to protect you if you're a good enough booker and you put him in there with the right guys. Monty Brown was a guy who, not the greatest worker in the world, very straightforward heavyweight style guy, but he had a charisma to him that helped him to really stand out in TNA's roster, especially in those early days. The presentation, the leopard print, the whole, like, I come from the Serengeti and I hunt animals, and that whole thing was all great. His promos were outstanding, where he would just, they were almost Rock-like in a way. Not quite up to that level, but it felt like he was kind of mimicking The Rock, but he also had that catchphrase where his finishing move was the pounce, which was basically just a shoulder tackle. It was about as basic as you can get. But the way he sold it and the way he performed it, it was like the most over move in wrestling, at least in TNA. It was awesome, but he would cut these promos, say, "You will feel the pounce." They kind of screech like a cat. And it's like, man, there's no one else around quite like this guy. He's just instantly stood out. And week by week, you could sense that the fans in the Impact Zone were really latching on to him. I was latching on to him. I'm like, this is the guy. This is your guy. He's got something. And he's also got crossover appeal because former football star, he could probably get you interviews on like ESPN or things like that. So I saw a lot of potential in Monty Brown. When I first saw him, he started off as a heel, and as the months wore on, I was kind of like, this guy needs to be babyface. They need to get him, I mean, heel's fine for now, but he needs to be a babyface, because he's just, you could just sense it. The fans were just latching on to him like crazy, and it was just, this is going to be the guy that ultimately topples Jarrett. You could just feel it. And he actually got his first shot against Jeff Jarrett in December of 2004. Right before the Turning Point pay-per-view, a pay-per-view that did not have a world title match on there. And that was important because I thought, wait a minute, there's no main event coming up. There's no world title main event coming up. There's no world title match at the next pay-per-view. Holy shit, Monty might win the title here. He might win the title. And so I watched that episode of Impact just wanting to see what would happen. I avoided spoilers because I knew the show was taped. And they got to this spot in the match where Jarrett hit Monty with the guitar, which was basically, you know, vintage Jarrett at that point. And Monty Brown no-sold the guitar shot. Well, he didn't no-sell it. He kind of stood up and was like groggy, but he didn't like go down immediately. And it was like, oh my God. And then he kicked out of the stroke, and it was like, oh my God, Monty's actually going to win the title. And that was one of those cool like wrestling superhero moments for a babyface, you know, things that like Hulk Hogan could do, or the Ultimate Warrior could do, or Sting could do. And apparently Monty Brown can do things like that too. And it was just super, super cool. And I thought, oh my God, Monty might win the belt here. Obviously he didn't. You know, some shenanigans took place and Monty didn't win the belt. But I thought his stock rose after that match. All right, he showed he can have a great match, a great main event level match. And he can fit in with the guys like Jeff Jarrett. Had a rematch against Jarrett at Final Resolution in January. Also came up on the short end of the stick there. But it was kind of like, he was kind of in that Braun Strowman phase where it's like, okay, he's over as hell. You haven't ruined him yet, but you got to pull the trigger. You've got to have a plan to pull the trigger. And I thought, because they had announced that they were going to do Bound for Glory, I thought he's going to win the title at Bound for Glory. That's what the very first Bound for Glory, that's what he's going to do. Because Monty has to be the guy. He's just, I mean, there's no one else on the roster. AJ's wrapped up in the X Division. You know, I was just looking at it, you know, Abyss is a heel. There was really like, you know, Jeff Hardy was Jeff Hardy at that point. It's just, there's nobody else. You got to go with Monty. He's over. The fans love him. He's got an act and a presentation and a character that have gotten over really big. And he had other matches along the way that got over. First TNA match to use thumbtacks, as far as I know, was the first Monsters Ball at Victory Road 04, a match that got a huge reaction. He worked with Abyss and Raven in that one. Had a rematch against Abyss the next month at Turning Point, and another match that was also pretty good. So it looked like Monty was just well on his way to the top. And then that fateful pay-per-view happened. I'll never forget it. Destination X 2005. Happened in March of 2005. And I was absolutely flabbergasted by the end of that pay-per-view because in a huge mistake that basically ruined one of their premier creations, the Alphamale Monty Brown, because again, not a former WWE guy, didn't have a previous history in the business. This was a straight up TNA guy. That just seemed like was well on his way to becoming the top guy of the promotion. He turned heel and helped Jeff Jarrett beat Diamond Dallas Page in the main event of that pay-per-view. And I was like, oh, that is such a mistake. It's such a mistake because heel turns, I mean, one of the reasons that everybody's screaming for Roman Reigns to turn heel is because everybody hates him already, so you might as well just do it. But, you know, even a really popular babyface, a heel turn can work if you do it correctly or if you have a really good idea. I thought Rikishi's heel turn, for example, in 2000, where he was revealed as the one that ran over Steve Austin, I thought that was effective. And his motivation for doing what he did was also fairly interesting. It's a shame they didn't mine that for more because I felt like there was a lot of gold there they could have gotten out of it. But yeah, so I understand that. Like, a popular face is going to turn heel once in a while. I guess you could even say like Kevin Owens turning on Chris Jericho, even though they were technically heels already. Like him turning on Jericho like took Jericho away from the fans, but that worked and was very effective in getting Owens heat and setting up that WrestleMania match. So I was completely fine with that. And the segment that they did it in was perfect. But you know, it's a little different when you have a guy that is just ready, willing and able to be the top guy of the promotion. It's like we're all just waiting for him to get the belt, and then you turn him heel. It's like, well, now you're making that thing of him winning the belt the thing that the fans aren't supposed to want, and that's a problem. And also, more importantly, as a heel, Monty at that point in time was not going to eclipse Jeff Jarrett. Jeff Jarrett was the designated top heel, and that was pretty much the case all the way to Bound for Glory 2006, where he dropped the belt to Sting. There was no way that Monty was going to eclipse Jarrett and be the top heel of the promotion. It just wasn't going to happen. It's just Jarrett's a better heel than he is anyway, and it just felt like, so it was kind of this two-pronged thing where, all right, the fans got screwed out of their hero, and he gets a demotion because now he's just Jeff Jarrett's lackey because he's never going to eclipse Jarrett so in that top heel role. So in one move, Monty Brown was almost completely ruined right off the bat. And the proof was in the cards that followed the next few pay-per-views. Monty Brown was tag teaming with Billy Gunn, named Kip James at this point, in a feud against 3 Live Crew. And I'm like, oh my God, this is so beneath where Monty Brown was just a couple months ago, and it was depressing to watch. It's like, you had him. He was right there. You had him. And just one bad heel turn just ruined everything. And, you know, it was just so disappointing. And it was probably the earliest example I can recall of, at least from the time I started watching TNA until now, it was the earliest instance I can recall where somebody got over, like really, really friggin' over in TNA, and they ruined it. And this was a case, yeah, they ruined it. They really, really ruined it. And it's unfortunate because, like I said, I felt like you watched him in 2004, Monty was there, man. He was just waiting. It was just all about pulling that trigger, and they just wouldn't do it. And the heel turn just seemed to derail everything, just set him back months. So while all that was going on, another thing happened, and I'm going to make a comparison to Demolition and the Road Warriors, where in 1990, at WrestleMania 6, Demolition felt like the top tag team in the world. Like, they were WWF's top tag team. They were the guys. They'd beaten Andre the Giant at WrestleMania to win the tag belts in Andre's final match at WrestleMania. So it was a, I mean, they looked like megastars at that show. Fast forward a few months, the Road Warriors show up, and it's almost like, and part of this is Bill Eadie like slowly being phased out, but it felt like once they got the Road Warriors, quote unquote, the real team, WWE just kind of lost interest in Demolition, and they just kind of slowly got phased out. In TNA in 2005, who debuted with the company in mid-2005? That would be Samoa Joe, a guy with a lot of indie cred. He had that legendary reign at Ring of Honor, and the internet fans loved him, so he had a lot of cred, a lot of hype. And Samoa Joe kind of took Monty Brown's place as that guy that murders everybody. Granted, he did it at the X Division level, but I mean, the main thing that, aside from the promos and the look and the presentation and the character, one of the main things that got Monty over were the 1-minute squash matches where he would just pound some motherfucker into oblivion. And it was awesome. It was like, it was kind of Goldberg-esque, but in a different way. You know, but it was cut from that same cloth, that Ultimate Warrior Goldberg cloth. And now all of a sudden Samoa Joe comes in and he's the one doing that type of stuff. And he's the one murdering people and throwing people around that are half his size and doing all these really cool, impressive things. So it almost felt like, okay, so not only did they ruin Monty, they got this guy that could kind of take his place. And TNA kind of lost interest in pushing Monty Brown. And it felt like once they got onto Spike TV later in the year, they tried to do something with Monty. They basically, at first, I remember the first few episodes on Spike TV, they basically ignored that they ever turned him heel. I was like, here's the alpha male, Monty Brown. It's almost like they were just kind of like ignoring that the last 6 months ever happened. But then sure enough, they turned him heel again and he worked with Jarrett and various other things. Had a small feud with Christian Cage that yielded some solid matches, but again, it was just kind of like Monty was just being fed to the bigger star. And Samoa Joe, and like I said, like his push seemed to be over. They seemed more interested in pushing Samoa Joe to the top. And rightfully so. I'm not saying they shouldn't push Joe. I'm just saying, look, why don't you push both of them and do a big match at Bound for Glory or something? I don't know, like the Pounce versus the Muscle Buster. I'd be down for that. They actually did have one match together. It was, sorry about that, my computer just made a noise. They did have one match together that was a triple threat match with Rhino thrown in. It was a really good match. I think it might have been Monty's last match with the company, actually, now that I think about it. But again, it's just kind of like Monty just felt like the odd man out in that situation. He'd already been ruined by that point. So very depressing and very sad that a guy who had generated so much interest the first year I started watching TNA ultimately amounted to nothing. As right as I was about AJ, I was... Monty didn't turn out the way I thought he would, and I don't know, I blame a lot of that on the booking, and some of it probably was also Monty not being completely smart to the business himself. He was still fairly new to the business, and he probably just did what he was told, didn't realize how damaging that heel turn was, and probably should have stood up for himself and said, no, this is a bad idea. I should be main eventing pay-per-views. I mean, you should really put me on the path to be world champion. I'm over as fuck right now. I'm one of the guys in your company in the first year you've been on television that has gotten over. But it is what it is. So Monty Brown just didn't work out in TNA, which is a shame because he should have wound up being one of their top stars. And to follow that up, he got a brief run in WWE, specifically their revival of ECW, where they brought him in as Marcus Corvon. Not a fan of the name right off the bat. And I remember I watched his debut and I thought, okay, maybe WWE will tap into some of that old alpha male Monty Brown magic that was there in 2004 and 2005. Maybe they'll find something that clicks and he'll get over again in WWE. I listened to his first promo and I'm expecting him to say, "Feel the pounce," and I'm waiting for it. And he said something to the effect of, "You'll go get beat up," and that was it. I'm like, oh, oh. Never mind. So he was like the alpha male Monty Brown, but like a really shitty, boring version of it. And he was just like any other guy on the roster. And while he was there, nobody realized he was there. And when he left, nobody missed him when he was gone. And again, very unfortunate. And it's just a shame. It's just, he was so hot there for that solid like 6-month period. And it was just God, what could have been? Because best case scenario, you'd like to think he would have been a top guy for TNA for like the next decade or so, at least. Again, you hope. You're thinking you hope. Now, I'd heard that he left the WWE because of family issues, and he wound up having to take care of his deceased sister's children or something, and he decided to leave wrestling to kind of take care of them, which, good on him. I mean, that's an awesome thing to do, and I think that's real big of him to do that, but I also feel like his wrestling career had kind of petered out by that point anyway, so it's kind of like, if he hadn't left the wrestling business, he probably wouldn't have lasted too much longer anyway, because he'd already been ruined in TNA and WWE wasn't doing anything with him. So, again, but Monty Brown to me will always be one of those interesting footnotes of like what could have been, what could have happened if all the stars aligned and everything went the way it was supposed to go and he got the push that he was supposed to get. And I can tell you right off the bat, one thing I think we would have gotten, he would have won the world title at some point, definitely. And I'm also thinking, man, now that I put the idea out there, Samoa Joe versus Monty Brown at Bound for Glory 2005 is like the first Bound for Glory main event. That would have been an interesting one to do. The previously undefeated Monty Brown taking on the newly undefeated Samoa Joe would have been like Samoa Joe's first foray into the heavyweight division. Or maybe even save it for 2006 when Joe had moved into the heavyweight rankings and then set Joe up for eventual match with Kurt Angle, which that's a whole other thing that I could get into at a different time. But I will say that one of the reasons I got into TNA initially was the alpha male Monty Brown, and it's a shame that his career didn't pan out the way it should have, because I thought there was a lot of potential there. But thank you once again for watching this edition of What Went Wrong. Stay tuned for more, because I have more and more ideas for this series coming up, so be on the lookout. But until then, be sure to like, subscribe, retweet, hit the little bell at the corner, and do all those other fun things, and also comment down below and tell me what you think. And what are some other characters that TNA dropped the ball with? Because again, I can make that into a whole series, like where TNA went wrong with guys that could have been big for them and they didn't capitalize on it. So that is all I have for you now. I've got a couple more videos lined up for you this week right before we finish up the month of May, so be on the lookout for those. But until then, y'all have a good night.